Have you ever wondered how the most powerful king in the world lost everything in a single night? Tonight, you'll hear the forgotten story of a ruler whose endless hunger for power changed his fate forever. So settle in, relax, and let this ancient mystery slowly unfold. King Aldrin ruled a kingdom so rich that travelers claimed its golden towers could be seen from miles away. Every morning, servants polished the palace floors until they reflected the sky, while thousands of soldiers guarded the walls. Yet despite all his wealth, the king could never sleep peacefully. Every night he feared someone stronger would steal his throne. Instead of enjoying the kingdom he had built, he spent his days planning new wars and demanding more treasure. His advisors begged him to stop, warning that no kingdom could grow stronger through fear alone, but the king ignored every word. Then, one cold evening, an old traveler arrived at the palace carrying nothing but a worn wooden staff. He asked for a simple meal and a warm place to rest. The guards laughed, but the traveler calmly said, "A king who cannot show kindness is already poorer than the poorest beggar." Those words reached the king's ears, and instead of feeling ashamed, he became furious. He ordered the old man to be thrown out before sunrise, never imagining that this single decision would change the destiny of his kingdom forever. The old traveler walked away without arguing, but before disappearing into the darkness, he quietly whispered, "By tomorrow, your greatest treasure will become your greatest lesson." The king laughed and returned to his grand hall, convinced that no stranger could threaten his power. Yet that very night, something felt different. The palace was strangely silent, the torches flickered without wind, and even the royal guard seemed uneasy. When dawn finally arrived, King Aldrin rushed to his treasure chamber, expecting to admire mountains of gold. Instead, every chest was empty. The sparkling jewels, priceless crowns, and piles of coins had vanished without a single broken lock or open door. Panic spread through the palace as servants searched every room, but nothing was ever found. For the first time in his life, the king realized that all the wealth he had spent years collecting could disappear in a single night. Desperate for answers, he remembered the mysterious traveler and ordered his fastest horse prepared. Leaving his frightened kingdom behind, the king rode deep into the ancient forest, determined to find the old man. He had no idea that the journey ahead would test not his strength, but the kind of person he truly was. The king rode through the forest until the trees became so thick that sunlight barely touched the ground. After hours of searching, he found the old traveler sitting beside a quiet stream, calmly feeding birds with pieces of bread. The king demanded to know where his treasure had gone, but the old man simply smiled and asked, "If your gold returned today, would you become a different ruler?" The king had no answer. Instead, the traveler handed him a small wooden box and said, "Inside this box is the greatest treasure in the world, but it will only open after you perform 3 acts of true kindness without expecting anything in return." Furious but desperate, the king accepted the challenge. On his journey home, he met a hungry family whose crops had failed, and for the first time in years, he shared his own food without asking for payment. Later, he found an injured soldier abandoned on the roadside and carried him safely back to the village instead of leaving him behind. Finally, he discovered an old bridge collapsing as children tried to cross it. Rather than ordering others to fix it, the king worked alongside the villagers until everyone reached safety. That evening, exhausted and covered in dirt, he remembered the wooden box. With trembling hands, he opened it, expecting diamonds or gold. Instead, he found only a tiny mirror and a single note that read, The richest king is the one whose people would protect him even if he owned nothing. For the first time in his life, King Aldrin understood what true wealth really meant, but he still had one final test waiting for him. Back in the kingdom, the people could hardly believe their eyes. The proud king who once demanded endless taxes and feared losing his throne was now walking through crowded markets without royal guards. He listened to blacksmiths, spoke with farmers, and thanked every worker who helped keep the kingdom alive. Day after day, he made changes that no one thought were possible. The palace kitchens prepared food for hungry families before serving the royal table. Empty fields were planted again, damaged roads were repaired, and schools were opened for children who had never been allowed to learn. As the months passed, laughter slowly returned to villages that had once been filled with fear. Even travelers from distant lands began saying that King Aldrin ruled the happiest kingdom they had ever seen. But deep inside, the king still wondered if he would ever meet the mysterious traveler again. One autumn evening, while the golden leaves drifted across the palace garden, a familiar voice quietly called his name. The old traveler stood beneath an ancient oak tree, looking exactly the same as before, as though time itself had never touched him. The king rushed forward, thanked him for changing his life, and asked the question that had haunted him for months. "Who are you?" The traveler smiled gently but gave no direct answer. Instead, he invited the king to follow him one last time. They walked through silent hallways until they reached the forgotten treasure chamber. With a slow turn of the giant iron key, the heavy doors opened. Inside, every chest overflowed with gold, every royal jewel sparkled brighter than ever, and every priceless crown rested exactly where it had been before disappearing. The king stared in complete disbelief. Not a single coin was missing. The traveler looked at him and quietly said, "Your treasure never truly belonged to you until you learned how little it mattered." The king finally understood. The greatest reward had never been the gold. It was the trust of his people, the peace in his heart, and the joy of serving others instead of ruling through fear. When he turned to thank the traveler one final time, the old man had vanished without leaving a single footprint behind. Some believed he had been a wandering sage. Others believed he was an angel sent to test a king's heart. No one ever discovered the truth. Yet for hundreds of years, parents told this story to their children before bedtime, reminding them that kindness creates a legacy far greater than power, and that the richest person in the world is never the one with the most gold, but the one remembered with the most love. Many years passed, and King Aldrin grew older, but he never returned to the ruler he had once been. Every decision he made was guided by the lesson hidden inside that small wooden box. Instead of building larger palaces, he built hospitals where the sick received care without paying a single coin. Instead of collecting more treasure, he lowered taxes so families could keep the rewards of their hard work. The kingdom became famous across distant lands, attracting merchants, artists, and scholars who wanted to live in a place where fairness mattered more than wealth. Travelers often asked what secret had made the kingdom so successful, but the king always smiled and answered, "The greatest investment is kindness." One winter morning, an elderly messenger arrived carrying a sealed letter with no name and no royal mark. Inside was a single sentence written in beautiful handwriting: "Your final lesson awaits where the first sunrise touches the mountain." Although his advisors begged him not to leave, the king quietly mounted his horse and rode alone before dawn. After a long journey, he reached the highest cliff overlooking the kingdom just as the first rays of sunlight painted the sky with gold. Waiting there was the same mysterious traveler, looking no older than the day they had first met. The king smiled warmly and thanked him for changing his life forever. The traveler pointed toward the peaceful kingdom below and asked, "What do you see?" The king looked carefully before replying, "I see children laughing without fear, families working together, and people who trust one another. I once believed my greatest treasure was hidden inside a vault, but now I know it lives inside every heart in my kingdom." The traveler nodded with quiet satisfaction. "Then my work is finished." As the morning sun grew brighter, the old man slowly faded into the light until he disappeared completely, leaving only the wooden staff resting against a stone. The king picked it up, but it felt surprisingly light, almost as if it carried no weight at all. He placed it in the royal hall, where it remained for generations as a reminder that wisdom is earned through humility, not power. When King Aldrin finally passed away many peaceful years later, thousands of people filled the streets, not because they were ordered to, but because they truly loved the ruler who had learned to put others before himself. And even today, the ancient legend ends with the same timeless message: a crown may make someone a king, but only compassion can make someone unforgettable. Centuries passed, yet the story of King Aldrin refused to fade into history. Every generation added its own details, but one mystery remained exactly the same. No one ever discovered where the old traveler came from or where he disappeared after that final sunrise. Some claimed he was an ancient guardian sent to test rulers who valued gold more than people. Others believed he had once been a king himself, forced to wander the world until he found someone willing to change. Whatever the truth was, his legend became even greater than the king's. Deep beneath the royal palace, the treasure chamber remained locked for decades. It was never opened for greed, only for times of great need. Whenever floods destroyed villages or harsh winters left families hungry, the royal family unlocked the doors and shared the gold with the people. Because of that promise, the kingdom never suffered the rebellions that destroyed neighboring lands. The people protected the palace not because soldiers ordered them to, but because they believed it belonged to everyone. Foreign kings often visited, hoping to learn the secret behind Aldrin's peaceful kingdom. They expected to find hidden weapons or unimaginable wealth. Instead, they found schools filled with children, busy marketplaces where merchants traded honestly, and smiling citizens who greeted their ruler as a friend rather than fearing him as a master. Many visiting rulers returned home inspired, but only a few truly understood the lesson. They copied the buildings, the laws, and the ceremonies, yet forgot the one thing that mattered most: a kind heart. Without that, their kingdoms slowly returned to chaos. As the years turned into centuries, the palace itself became an ancient monument. Travelers crossed deserts, forests, and oceans just to stand before the old wooden staff displayed in the royal hall. Beside it rested the tiny mirror from the wooden box, still carrying the same message that had transformed a proud ruler into a beloved king. Visitors would quietly read the words before leaving with a different view of success. Some became better leaders. Some repaired broken friendships. Others simply chose kindness over anger for the first time in years. And that is why the legend of King Aldrin never truly ended. It became more than the story of one king. It became a reminder passed from parent to child, teacher to student, and traveler to stranger, that fortunes can disappear overnight, castles can crumble into dust, and crowns can be forgotten by history, but a single act of kindness can echo through generations, long after every treasure has vanished. Long after King Aldrin's time, a young prince named Rowan grew up hearing the legendary tale almost every night before bed. Like many children, he believed it was only an old bedtime story created to teach kindness. But everything changed on his 18th birthday, when the palace librarian secretly handed him a dusty leather journal discovered beneath the royal throne. The first page carried King Aldrin's own signature. Every chapter described the king's greatest fears, his mistakes, and the incredible journey that transformed his heart. Yet the final page contained only one unfinished sentence: the greatest treasure still waits for the ruler who. Nothing more was written. Curious and determined, Rowan searched every room of the ancient palace for answers. Hidden behind a loose stone inside the old treasure chamber, he discovered a small bronze key wrapped in faded cloth. Attached to it was a note written in the same elegant handwriting: "When your heart seeks wisdom instead of power, follow the northern stars." That very night, Rowan quietly left the palace with only a horse, a lantern, and the mysterious key. His journey led him across snowy mountains, silent forests, and forgotten ruins where almost no traveler dared to go. After many days, he arrived at an ancient temple carved directly into the side of a cliff. The bronze key fit perfectly into the weathered stone door. As it slowly opened, Rowan expected to find rooms filled with unimaginable riches. Instead, he stepped into a peaceful library unlike anything he had ever imagined. Thousands of handwritten books lined the walls from floor to ceiling. Each one contained the life story of a ruler from a different kingdom. Some pages celebrated leaders remembered for their compassion, while others told heartbreaking stories of kings destroyed by pride and greed. At the center of the room stood an empty wooden table with a single blank book waiting to be written. A familiar voice echoed softly through the sill. "Ent Hall. Every ruler leaves behind two treasures," the unseen traveler said. "One is made of gold and disappears with time. The other is made of choices and lives forever in the hearts of people." Rowan slowly understood why the last sentence in King Aldrin's journal had never been finished. It was never meant for him. It was meant for every future leader to complete through their own actions. As he placed his hand on the blank book, its empty pages began to glow, waiting for the story that only he could write. As Rowan placed his hand on the glowing blank book, the empty pages slowly filled with a sentence written in shimmering ink: "Every choice you make from this moment forward will become the history that future generations remember." The young prince stood completely still, realizing that this was not a book about the past, it was a book waiting to record his own life. Suddenly, the familiar voice of the mysterious traveler echoed through the silent library once again. King Aldrin completed his journey by changing himself. Your journey begins by protecting what he built. Before Rowan could ask another question, the glowing light faded, and the ancient library became quiet once more. He carefully closed the book, took the bronze key, and began the long journey back to the kingdom. Days later, as the palace finally appeared on the horizon, he immediately sensed that something was wrong. Smoke rose from distant villages, frightened families hurried through the streets, and royal guards rushed toward the castle gates. Rowan quickly learned that a powerful neighboring ruler had heard rumors about the legendary treasure of King Aldrin and had gathered a massive army to seize it. The enemy believed that whoever possessed the royal treasure would become the richest ruler in the world. Rowan remembered every lesson written inside Aldrin's journal. He knew that another bloody war would only destroy everything the great king had spent his life rebuilding. Instead of preparing for battle alone, he invited the neighboring ruler to meet inside the old palace. The enemy king arrived expecting threats, secret weapons, and endless gold. Instead, Rowan welcomed him with respect and led him into the ancient treasure chamber. The heavy doors slowly opened, revealing the same mountains of gold that had amazed generations before. But Rowan walked past every shining chest until he reached the small wooden box and the tiny mirror resting beside the old traveler's staff. He handed the mirror to the invading king without saying a word. Confused, the ruler looked into the reflection and then noticed the familiar message engraved beneath it: "The richest ruler is the one whose people would protect him even if he owned nothing." For several long moments, absolute silence filled the chamber. The enemy king lowered the mirror, looked around the peaceful palace, and for the first time noticed that no frightened citizens were hiding from their ruler. They trusted him completely. In that quiet moment, the stranger finally understood why King Aldrin's kingdom had remained strong for generations, not because of its treasure, but because the hearts of its people were worth far more than gold. And as both rulers walked out of the chamber together, Rowan realized that the unfinished story in the glowing book had already begun writing its very first chapter. As Rowan and the neighboring ruler walked out of the treasure chamber together, the palace guards waited anxiously for a command to prepare for war. Instead, the visiting king slowly removed his sword and handed it to Rowan. The crowded hall fell silent. No one could believe that the ruler who had arrived with an army now stood peacefully beside the young prince. The stranger looked at the people gathered around them and said, "I came seeking gold, but I found something far more valuable. A kingdom where the people trust their ruler is stronger than any army." His soldiers were ordered to leave the borders before sunset, and the threat of war disappeared without a single battle. That evening, Rowan opened the glowing book once more. New words had appeared across the pages: "A wise ruler wins hearts before he wins wars." The prince understood that the book was recording every important choice he made. He spent the next months traveling through villages, speaking with fishermen, farmers, and craftsmen just as King Aldrin once had. Everywhere he went, people told him stories about the old king who had learned that kindness was the greatest treasure. Rowan listened carefully because he knew he was becoming part of that same legacy. One stormy night, a messenger arrived from the northern mountains with troubling news. A terrible landslide had destroyed roads and trapped several villages beneath fallen rock. Many advisors urged Rowan to stay safely inside the palace and send soldiers instead, but the young prince remembered the lesson of the mirror. Before dawn, he rode north with workers, doctors, and supplies. For days he helped clear roads, carried food to families, and stayed beside injured villagers until they were safe. The people were astonished to see a future king working with his own hands in the cold rain. When the final village was rescued, an elderly woman quietly pressed a small silver coin into Rowan's palm. "I have nothing else to give," she said, "but you came when we needed you." Rowan looked at the worn coin and realized it felt more valuable than all the treasure locked beneath the palace. That night, as he rested beside a campfire in the mountains, he opened the glowing book again. Another sentence had appeared: "The greatest wealth is earned when people feel protected, heard, and remembered." Rowan closed the book and looked toward the distant lights of his kingdom. He finally understood that the story King Aldrin began years ago had not ended with a single ruler. It was being passed forward, one choice at a time, and now the next chapter belonged to him. As Rowan closed the glowing book and looked toward the distant lights of his kingdom, he felt a deep sense of responsibility settle in his heart. He knew that every choice he made from now on would shape not only his own future, but the future of generations yet to come. When he returned to the palace a few days later, the people welcomed him with smiles instead of grand celebrations. That simple welcome meant more to him than any royal ceremony ever could. But peace never lasts forever. Early one morning, royal scouts arrived with unexpected news. Deep within the eastern forest, woodcutters had uncovered the entrance to an enormous underground chamber that no one had seen for hundreds of years. Strange carvings covered the ancient stone walls, and at the center of the entrance stood a symbol identical to the one engraved on the mysterious wooden box King Aldrin had once received. Rowan immediately remembered the glowing book, the bronze key, and every lesson the old traveler had left behind. Believing this discovery was connected to Aldrin's forgotten past, he gathered only a few trusted companions and rode toward the forest. After hours of traveling beneath towering trees, they finally reached the hidden entrance. Massive stone doors slowly opened, revealing a quiet underground hall illuminated by beams of sunlight shining through cracks in the ceiling. There were no piles of treasure waiting inside. Instead, the walls were covered with beautifully carved scenes showing ordinary people helping one another during times of famine, war, and disaster. At the end of the chamber rested a single stone pedestal holding another sealed journal. Unlike King Aldrin's diary, this one had never been opened. Rowan carefully lifted it and noticed words carved beneath it. This book may only be read by the ruler who chooses compassion when revenge would be easier. Before he could open the cover, the familiar voice of the mysterious traveler echoed softly through the chamber 1F. Final time. Every generation faces a different test, the voice whispered. Your greatest challenge has not yet arrived. The hall suddenly became silent again, leaving Rowan standing alone with the ancient journal in his hands. As he looked toward the dark passage leading deeper beneath the mountain, he realized that another secret, older even than King Aldrin's legend, was waiting to be uncovered, and that the next chapter of his journey had only just begun.